The November rain had turned Margaret Chen's garden into a watercolor painting, all soft edges and muted greens beneath the pewter sky. At 73, she had learned to appreciate mornings like this, the kind that invited stillness, that demanded nothing but a warm cup of oolong and the company of her own thoughts. Her husband David had been gone 4 years now. Their daughter Emily lived in Singapore with her own family, video calls scheduled like business meetings, love expressed in logistics. The house on Maple Street, with its 3 bedrooms and wraparound porch, held its breath around her. She had become skilled at filling silence, the radio murmuring NPR, the grandfather clock marking hours, her own footsteps on hardwood floors. She was washing her breakfast dishes when she noticed the shed door slightly ajar. The shed sat at the far corner of her property, behind the dormant vegetable garden and the Japanese maple David had planted for their 30th anniversary. It housed gardening tools, Christmas decorations, boxes of things she couldn't bring herself to sort through. She hadn't opened it in months. Margaret dried her hands on the dish towel embroidered with faded strawberries, a gift from Emily years ago, and slipped on her rain boots. The morning air carried that particular autumn sharpness, the smell of wet leaves and earth preparing for sleep. She was halfway across the lawn when she saw the girl. She couldn't have been more than 20, though her face had the hollow quality of someone who had learned to make herself small. She was curled on an old camping mat in the corner of the shed, a threadbare blanket pulled up to her chin, surrounded by what appeared to be everything she owned: a backpack worn soft at the seams, a stack of textbooks held together with a rubber band, a laptop with a cracked screen. The girl's eyes opened, wide, dark, startled like a deer, and she scrambled upright so fast she knocked over a terracotta pot. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll go. I didn't take anything. I swear it was raining and I—" "Stop." Margaret's voice came out gentler than she intended. "Just stop." The girl froze, one sneaker half on, her whole body poised for flight. Margaret studied her, the careful way she held herself. The books, organic chemistry, molecular biology, the university ID lanyard tangled in her hair, the exhaustion that lived in the shadows beneath her eyes. "How long have you been sleeping in my shed?" The girl's chin trembled, but she held Margaret's gaze. 3 weeks. I know it was wrong. I'll leave right now. You don't have to call anyone." 3 weeks. Margaret absorbed this. "In November. I have a sleeping bag. Had. Someone took it from the library when I fell asleep studying." The girl laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Sorry, that's not your problem. I'm going." "Sit down." Something in Margaret's voice, perhaps the same tone that had once commanded classrooms full of restless medical students, made the girl sink back onto the camping mat. "What's your name?" Jordan Reyes." "Are you a student?" Jordan nodded, then looked away. "Pre-med, sophomore. Well, I was." "Was?" The story came out in fragments, the way difficult truths often do. Jordan had grown up in foster care, aged out of the system at 18, with a garbage bag of clothes and a community college scholarship. She had worked her way to the university on academic excellence alone. No family money, no safety net, nothing but her own relentless determination. She'd been working 3 jobs while maintaining a 3.9 GPA. Then the restaurant where she waitressed closed. Then her roommate's parents stopped paying rent. Then the financial aid office made an error that wouldn't be corrected until next semester. "I tried everything," Jordan said, her voice steady even as tears tracked down her cheeks. "The emergency fund ran out. The food bank helps, but they can't give me a place to sleep. I shower at the gym. I study at the library until they close. I just need to make it to January, when my aid comes through. I just need—" She stopped, pressed her palms against her eyes. "I just need to not be invisible for one more day." Margaret thought of all the mornings she had walked through this garden, past this shed, while this girl shivered inside. She thought of the empty bedrooms in her house, the silence she had tried to fill with radio noise and scheduled calls. She thought of David, who had spent 40 years as a family physician, who had believed that medicine was just another word for bearing witness to someone's pain. "Can you cook?" Margaret asked. Jordan blinked. "What?" "I'm 73 years old. I've been eating frozen dinners and calling it self-care. If you can cook even moderately well, I'd consider it a fair trade for the guest room." I'm not offering charity." Margaret's voice was firm. "I'm offering a room in exchange for help around the house. Cooking, some cleaning, company for an old woman who talks to her plants because there's no one else to listen. You'd be doing me the favor." Jordan stared at her. In the gray morning light filtering through the shed's dusty window, she looked impossibly young. "Why would you do this? You don't know me?" Margaret considered the question. She thought of all the students she had taught over 3 decades, their faces blurring into one long river of young people reaching toward futures they couldn't yet imagine. She thought of Emily at 20, sheltered and certain, never once wondering where her next meal would come from. "Because someone should," she said simply. "And because I can." The first week was careful. Jordan moved through Margaret's house like a guest who expected to be asked to leave at any moment, touching nothing, apologizing for everything. She slept with her packed backpack beside the bed. But Margaret had been a professor. She understood that trust was built in small moments, in the accumulation of ordinary days. She showed Jordan how to make her mother's congee, the rice porridge David had loved, and didn't comment when the girl cried over the stove. She left a house key on Jordan's nightstand without ceremony. She asked about organic chemistry and listened, really listened, as Jordan's face transformed with the joy of explaining enzyme kinetics. Slowly, the guest room became Jordan's room. The backpack moved to the closet. A photograph appeared on the dresser, a younger Jordan with an elderly woman, both of them laughing. "My grandmother," Jordan explained one evening. "They were washing dishes together, a ritual that had become as natural as breathing. My birth grandmother, she raised me until I was 7, then she got sick and I went into the system. She looks kind. She used to say," Jordan's voice caught. "She used to say that kindness was just love in work clothes." Margaret handed her a dish towel. "She sounds like someone I would have liked." The weeks folded into months. Jordan's grades, always strong, grew stronger, now that she wasn't calculating how many hours she could survive in the library before someone noticed she had nowhere else to go. She joined a study group, made friends, started laughing without looking over her shoulder first. Margaret found herself waking earlier, lingering over breakfast, looking forward to evenings when Jordan would burst through the door full of stories about professors and lab partners and the cadaver she'd named Gerald. The house on Maple Street began to breathe again. One night in February, a winter storm knocked out the power. They sat in the living room by candlelight, wrapped in quilts Margaret had stored away after David's death, and talked until 3 in the morning. Jordan told her about the foster homes, the good ones and the terrible ones. The way she had learned to never unpack completely, to sleep with her shoes on, to keep her voice small and her needs smaller. Margaret told her about David, how they had met in medical school, how he had proposed in the hospital cafeteria, how she had held his hand at the end and promised to keep living even when she wasn't sure she remembered how. "He would have loved you," Margaret said. "You think so?" "I know so. He always said the best doctors weren't the smartest ones. They were the ones who remembered what it felt like to be scared." Jordan was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Margaret, can I ask you something? Anything? Why did you really take me in? The truth?" Margaret watched the candle flame dance, casting warm shadows across the walls of her home. "Because I was disappearing," she said quietly. "Living alone, talking to no one, watching the days blur together. And then I found you in my shed, fighting so hard to exist, and I thought, here is someone who refuses to be invisible. Here is someone who still believes their life is worth saving." She reached over and took Jordan's hand. "I didn't rescue you, Jordan. You reminded me that I was still capable of mattering to someone." Spring arrived like a promise kept. Jordan passed her finals with honors. Margaret planted tomatoes in the garden for the first time in 5 years. Emily visited in April and found her mother laughing in the kitchen with a young woman she'd never met, both of them covered in flour from a baking disaster they would later describe as experimental. "Mom," Emily whispered that night, her voice thick, "you look like yourself again." The adoption conversation happened in May, on the anniversary of David's death. Margaret had gone to the cemetery alone, as she did every year. She talked to David about the garden, about Emily's children, about the strange and wonderful gift of a girl who had wandered into her life looking for shelter, and had given her, instead, a reason to keep the porch light on. When she came home, Jordan was sitting on the back steps, looking out at the shed. "I got into Johns Hopkins," Jordan said. "Medical school, full scholarship." "Jordan," Margaret sat beside her, her heart cracking open with pride. "That's wonderful. It's in Baltimore. I know where Johns Hopkins is. I don't want to leave you." Margaret took her hand. "You're not leaving. You're becoming. Those are different things." Jordan turned to her, tears streaming freely now. "You're my family. You know that, right? You're the first real family I've had since my grandmother died. I don't want to just be the girl who lived in your guest room. I want—" She stopped, struggling for words. "I want it to be official. I want people to know that someone chose me, that I belong somewhere." Margaret thought of all the forms she would have to fill out, the legal processes, the questions. She thought of Emily and what she would say. She thought of David, who had spent his life choosing people, patient after patient, believing that the act of showing up was the only medicine that truly healed. "You know," Margaret said, "I've been thinking the same thing." The adoption was finalized in August, 1 year after Margaret had found Jordan sleeping in her shed. They celebrated with a small dinner. Emily and her family, some of Jordan's friends from school, Margaret's former colleagues who had watched her withdraw into grief and were now watching her return to the world with a daughter she had found in the most unlikely of places. Jordan gave a toast. She talked about hunger and cold and the particular loneliness of being 20 years old with no one to call in an emergency. She talked about a shed in a garden and an old woman who had asked not, "Why are you here?" but, "Can you cook?" "I spent my whole life believing I would have to earn love," Jordan said, her voice steady, "that if I was smart enough, good enough, small enough, someone might eventually let me stay. Margaret taught me that real love doesn't ask you to earn it, it just makes room." Margaret wiped her eyes and pretended she wasn't crying. Later, after the guests had gone and the dishes were done, they sat together on the back porch. The shed was visible in the moonlight, its door properly closed now, a climbing rose growing up its side. "You know what I was thinking about that first morning?" Margaret asked, "when you found me? I was thinking about how quiet the house had gotten, how I had stopped noticing the silence because it had become everything." She looked at Jordan, her daughter, her unexpected gift. "You weren't the homeless one, Jordan. I was. I just didn't know it until you showed me what home could feel like again." Jordan leaned her head on Margaret's shoulder. "Love and work clothes," she said softly. "What's that?" "Something my grandmother used to say. She said kindness was just love and work clothes." Jordan smiled. "I think she was right." The night settled around them, soft and full of cricket song. In the garden, David's Japanese maple rustled in the breeze. Somewhere in Baltimore, a dorm room waited, but not yet. For now, there was this. Two women who had found each other in a shed, in the rain, in the middle of ordinary lives that had become extraordinary simply by making room. The porch light glowed amber against the darkness, and Margaret Chen was for the first time in years exactly where she was supposed to be.